Welcome, everyone. My name is Morgan King. I'm the Climate Action Analyst at Humboldt State, and I have the pleasure of being the moderator for this panel discussion. The title of this panel is The Challenges of Leading a Low Waste Lifestyle When Living Off Campus. And it is one of many sessions being held this week as part of the 5th Annual Zero Waste Conference, which is annually produced by our very own Waste Reduction Resource Awareness Program. To see the calendar of events for the rest of the conference, you can go to RAP's website, and I'll go ahead and put the link to their website into the chat once again, in case you didn't see it previously. So check that out. And before we go any further, I did want to begin by acknowledging that I am on the land of the Wiyot peoples, which includes the Wiyot tribe, the Bear River Rancheria, and the Blue Lake Rancheria. Arcata is known as Gudini, meaning over in the redwoods or among the redwoods. And the Wiyot people's persistence to remain in relationship with these lands, despite their attempted genocide, compels me to spread awareness of the true history of this space. I strive to hold myself and others accountable for the continuation of colonial acts that neglect the voices and the needs of these tribes. For renters living off campus, it can be especially difficult to practice even the basics of waste reduction, like recycling and composting. So do you have a landlord or a property manager that does not provide even these basics, like adequate recycling bins? Is it hard to find information about what is actually recyclable and where to do it? And why is that the case? And what can we do about it? These are some questions that we're going to explore today. So thank you for joining us in this lively discussion as we explore these challenges and opportunities to reduce waste when living off campus. We're going to watch a short film starring yours truly and made for the Humboldt Tenant Landlord Collaborative. And then our panelists will share their experiences living off campus, and we'll provide insights, tips, etc. on what we all can do to see a future without waste. So just a quick note about how you can interact with us. Attendees will be able to interact with the moderator and panelists via the chat and the Q&A functions. So at any time, if you have a question for our panelists or the moderator, please be sure to type it into the Q&A function. We will devote the second half of this session to your questions, which I'll go ahead and read out to panelists in the order received. Also, if you need closed captioning, please click on the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. So before I introduce our panelists, I'd like everyone in our audience today to respond to this question by typing their answer into the chat. We're gonna try a little interactive exercise here. So here's the question. Have you ever had a waste item in your hands and you weren't sure if it was recycling or landfill waste? So you applied some wishful thinking and threw it in the recycling bin. What was that item that you hoped was recycling, but you weren't exactly sure? Please go ahead and type that item into the chat. So we'll give you a minute to do that. And panelists, you're invited to do that as well.
What are those things that the milk cartons come in? It's like oat milk and Tetra Packs?
Tetra Packs, yeah.
I was gonna say
it's called aseptic containers. Yeah. All right. So Brooke tells us a perishable plastic food wrapper. Yeah, those can be challenging, especially because a lot of times you'll actually see a recycling symbol on food wrappers. Sky says plastic clamshells. Sam says egg cartons. what does the panel think about egg cartons? What do you guys think we should do with egg cartons?
Throw them in the compost.
Yeah, compost them.
Yeah, compost them. Right. Okay, great. So let me go ahead and introduce today's panelists. First off, we have Amanda McDonald. She's the program manager for the Waste Reduction Resource Awareness Program and majoring in environmental education and interpretation with minors in recreation administration and indigenous peoples, natural resource use, and the environment. A standout in the local slacklining community, Amanda shares a house with others outside of Arcata near the Mad River. Skylar Fisher is the Zero Waste Director with RAP. She is majoring in environmental sciences and management with an emphasis in policy and planning. An avid gardener, Skylar currently shares an apartment with other students in Arcata. Anna Bezert is the resident sustainability advisor in housing and is majoring in environmental studies with a minor in economics. A rising gardener, Anna shares a house with other students in Arcata. And Sam Kelly is the director of the Reusable Office Supply Exchange. As an environmental science and management major with a double minor in botany and philosophy, Sam still finds some spare time to run and do little art projects. Sam currently rents her own place in Arcata. So welcome to all of our panelists, and we are looking forward to a lively conversation. But before we do that, I am going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to watch a very short film about waste management while living off campus. So here we go. As a standard practice, there needs to be bins that are inside of the house or the apartment and bins that are curbside or outside of the apartment or household. And those need to be clearly labeled and they need to be the right size. Generally in a house, the recommendation is that you have bins that are about 15 gallons or so in size. You want to have them next to each other and properly labeled. And then outside of your apartment or household, it's critical to have the bins properly sized. There are many locations that will have a big trash dumpster at a multifamily complex and then just have 3 or 4 at most recycling carts. And the trash dumpster is far larger than what's available for recycling. At some point, the occupants of that space are going to be putting trash into the recycling bin because they don't have a choice. So that contaminates that recycling. So all that recycling has to get thrown away. If the property manager is unable to actually put signs on the bins themselves, find a space in high traffic areas to actually post in large format a recycling guide and a trash guide. Make sure that your tenants have access to that information. Humboldt Waste Management Authority, Recology, Humboldt Sanitation have good recycling guides on their websites. Great place to start to get that information. I would absolutely encourage landlords and property managers to make sure that all their rentals are equipped with curbside pickup. We need to make sure that those trash and recycling bins are large enough for the number of people in that household or that rental so that when they put those carts out on the curb the night before, they're not overstuffed. when a cart is put out and the cart is so full that the lid is popped up. That leads to a lot of environmental contamination. Crows get into it, they open it up, they spread trash out, rats get into it, the wind blows trash out. Many of our apartment and rental locations are close to waterways, so a lot of that then gets into the water. It's a huge problem. I think our property managers and landlords can help with that and work with the tenants. When we're talking about being a good member of the community, a steward of the environment, and best practices, I really think that initial responsibility can't be placed on the tenant. The tenant can pay for it, that can be part of it, but having that system in place should just be the same as making sure that there are utilities at that location, that the electricity works. It's a utility. There's a number of items that can be recycled, just not in your curbside bin. And it's actually quite important to find a way to recycle certain items, such as electronic waste, like our TVs, our monitors, our phones. Also universal waste, which includes batteries, compact fluorescent light bulbs. Those should not go in the trash, but they can be taken to a local recycling center and dropped off for free. It's actually illegal in the state of California to put that in the trash. There's a number of items like that that can and should be recycled, just not in your curbside cart. That's really just for your paper, your cardboard, your bottles and cans. If you live in Recology's service area, Recology will provide what they call bulky pickup, and they'll do that twice a year for households. Currently, they're not doing it for apartment complexes. And also, currently, you can recycle mattresses and their foundations for free. If you don't have a vehicle and it's a challenge for you to actually transport that stuff somewhere else, I think really that's where our property managers and our landlords can help. Take that opportunity to communicate to your tenants and schedule someone with a truck to come at a certain time and help take that stuff. You can go to the HWMA website, Humboldt Sanitation website, Recology website, and learn about where you can take these items. I think everyone wants to do the right thing. Please don't do free piles. For many people, they see putting lightly used or potentially donatable items out on the curb as a nice thing to do, and that there will be folks that will find those items and they'll want them. But the reality is that rarely do you see everything from a free pile go away. More often than not, those items remain outside. It rains on them, those items get soiled, unusable, and oftentimes they're never picked up. And what we see is the responsibility then falls on our cities to clean up this mess. And it's costing them thousands of dollars a year to do that. And that doesn't touch on the environmental pollution that is caused by these items, again, getting into our waterways, blowing into the drains, blowing out into our wild spaces. There's lots of great alternatives. We have local charities, thrift stores, businesses, and organizations that will take just about everything that people try to put out on the street. I would encourage everyone to take a look, see what businesses, what organizations are available locally, what they will accept. I mentioned the City of Arcata's website. If you go into their section on waste and recycling, they produce a very nice list of what you can donate and where you can donate it. We also have information like that on the HSU website, but find out about where you can bring these things instead of just putting them on the street and waiting for someone else to take that responsibility. The opportunity still exists, I think, for a tenant. If they want to separate and segregate their recycling, they can bring loads of cans and bottles and recyclables to a recycling center and get money for that. That is an extra step that a tenant could take if they so wish.
all in this together. We all are striving to create resilient communities for both our tenant population as well as our landlord and property manager population. We need to move beyond just thinking about the economics of waste management and consider the social and environmental ramifications of what we do. This needs to be the broad global paradigm shift that we're striving for. And we can do it. We can be partners in this effort. And by doing so, we're participating and strengthening our communities.
All right. So this was a short film we made last year for the Educated Landlord and Tenant Program. Of course, that was developed in partnership with the Humboldt Tenant Landlord Collaboration that covers a wide range of topics such as how to be a good landlord, how to be a good tenant, implicit bias, rights and responsibilities, indigenous perspectives, emotional service animals, as well as a module on waste and recycling. Shante Kott is the off-campus housing coordinator at HSU and oversees the Humboldt Tenant Landlord Collaboration. I'll go ahead and put a link in the chat if you want more information about this program. Let's see. Okay, it's in there. You know, again, as was mentioned before, this film was made last year before COVID hit and some things changed within the recycling world. I'm referring to the part about the California Redemption Value, CRV, for recycling bottles and cans and some other items that have a CRV value to them. Currently, that is not possible in Humboldt County and actually across the state, while the state works on trying to come up with some solutions to the issues that have brought them to suspend the program. So unfortunately, there is no opportunity to redeem your recycling currently. I know that some folks are stockpiling it at their homes waiting for the opportunity to come around again. So fingers crossed that we'll see that again soon. And with that, let's go ahead and dive into our discussion with our panel. And I'd first like to throw a question at Skylar. So Sky, what is the trash recycling compost scene like where you live?
Well, by watching the video and talking about like how there's the one dumpster and then the much, much smaller recycling bin reminded me of where I live. It's very, because the way that my property sits is offsite out of the road, so you have to drive in, and so the it's a private landlord, and so they will physically get the trash and take it out with them to every week, and that's just for the regular trash. But for the recycling, I don't think there's a schedule. They just sometimes pick up the recycling, and some days we don't have a recycling bin, some days we do have a recycling bin. So that definitely encourages people to throw away their recycling. I'll just try to stockpile it. I take it as an excuse to try to reduce the amount of waste I produce because there's only one bin for all of us, so it fills up really quickly. So I've gotten down to only having to take out the trash about once every 2-3 weeks, which is cool. But as far as composting, there's no formalized composting anywhere, so it's really up to the individual to kind of create their own space for that.
Wow, that sounds frustrating and like a lot of work. Anna, let's kind of keep along that line. What would you say is your biggest frustration or the largest barrier that you face to reduce waste where you live?
Well, we pay for recology on our street, and kind of similar to Skylar's situation, it's a private road, so we have to individually take our cans out to the end of the street for Recology to come pick that up. The bins, of course, are really small because that's what we can afford. So we do reduce waste in that way. And again, similar to Skylar's situation, we don't have any formalized composting. I personally go through the local worm guy and get like a 10-gallon from him. And that gets picked up and they actually come onto our street and pick it up right off of our doorstep. So there isn't a lot of barriers, but our landlord doesn't necessarily make it easy either. There's no signage or anything like that. No one comes and cleans up all the extra waste that ends up on the street, even though it's his street. So it ends up just being a mess over here.
Amanda, do you pay for your trash service? And what are your thoughts about having, as a tenant living off campus? Do you think it's by having to pay for trash? Do you think that creates a disincentive to waste?
I think, like, Anna was saying with the smaller bins, because we have to pay for Recology and it's a certain, like, it's tiered out. If you want a bigger trash bin, you pay more for it. So college students often go for the 10-gallon trash bin or however many gallons it is. And that's kind of an incentive to reduce waste. What was the question about disincentive?
For example, when living on campus, residents do not, pay for the amount of trash they throw away. So I was just curious for folks that are living off campus, because they suddenly might have to pay that as separate from their rent. Does that cause them to reconsider what they're throwing away?
I think for a split second it does, but really, trash is mindless and we're not thinking about it as when we're in the store purchasing things that we think we need. We're not thinking about where it's going to end up, and it's in our trash can, and then it's trash night, and then the trash is full, and then I'm putting my trash in the recycling because the recycling bin is bigger. So there's many layers to it.
Gotcha. Okay. So Sam, Anna mentioned that she's able to compost through a service. So I kind of wanted to continue along that thought. There's a number of pieces of legislation that have come through California over the years around organics recycling. For example, most recently, California State Assembly Bill 1826, which requires apartment and multifamily dwellings with 5 or more units, and that generate 2 cubic yards of all waste, whether that's trash, recycling, or green waste. If you're a unit or a dwelling with 5+ units and you generate 2 cubic yards of waste, then you are required to have a compost service for tenants. And that was a requirement as of January of this year. So one problem that we face in this county is that we do not have a permitted commercial facility that can take food waste. There's also a lack of enforcement, I'd say, and not all apartment complexes have the space to set up, a backyard composting system or a neighborhood scale composting system. So, Sam, how are you getting around all this and still composting while living in an apartment? And I'm curious if you can just explain a little more in detail about what that service is like and what it costs and other things like that.
Yeah, so like Anna, I also go through the local worm guy. I currently live alone, so I have a smaller bucket. I think mine's just a 5-gallon bucket, and it gets picked up every other week, and it's $15 a month, which is cheaper than it is to pay for your trash cans. And I I just recently moved into a studio apartment, but before I was living in a similar kind of situation. I lived above a dentist's office and I had 2 roommates, so we didn't have any like backyard space, and we did the same thing. And we still had the smaller gallon bucket, and we still had them pick it up every other week, and we were able to, you know, cut down our waste enough to do that. So I think if you can, you know, afford it, and then with roommates, just making sure, you know, talking to them about like what you can and can't compost. I think that that's a good way to do it. But I mean, like you said, Morgan, it's like that's an option here, but I'm from Sacramento, and like I had never even really like heard of or known, you know, what composting was or how to do it before I came up here. So it's like, depending on the area, there's a huge lack of education in terms of that and resources.
Sam, how did you find out about the local worm guy?
I kind of did some research on my own. When I started working for WRAP about a year ago, that's when I learned a lot about food waste and composting and like how important it is to, you know, take that extra step beyond just recycling. And so I had heard about the local worm guy a little bit through WRAP, just because I knew that we like had a partnership with him through the campus, and that he took some of our compost. And I was just kind of like Googling to see if there were any compost services that, you know, would be able to take that, because I wasn't able to do my own compost. And he was like the main one that came up, and he has like a super organized website. It's all like very clear. Yeah, and he literally texts me like every time to remind me to put my compost out. And he's like, if one week you have something that's like a little more, like he's cool about like if you have a little extra bag.
Yeah, all right. Great. So for everyone in the chat, I put the local worm guy's website. So if you're interested in a compost pickup service, go ahead and check that out. All right. Let's go ahead and move on. The zero waste hierarchy prioritizes rethinking, reducing, and reusing what we buy over recycling or composting it. So I want to put this question to Amanda. What are some ways you have implemented these strategies in your life to reduce waste?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with what we buy with our dollar. So when I go to the grocery store, I typically make a list of things that I need. And when inside the grocery store and I'm presented with several options, I always go for 1, the least wasteful, 2, aluminum or glass over plastic, and then 3, paper over plastic always. And that helps a lot. I try to stay away from anything that's like chips or, you know, snacks that are really rewarding and taste good. And I like to have around the house, especially when I'm going to school on the computer and I always just want to like have a quick snack. But just in the name of reducing waste and like looking what actually ends up in the trash can every week, it's always those quick items that build up, you know, when you live with 4 or 5 people. So I try and really just reduce those items that I'm purchasing and, you know, cook more whole foods.
Awesome. Any other panelists want to chime in on that? Taking a look at, you know, not just recycling, composting, but, you know, how we can kind of rethink what we're purchasing and consuming, and reducing as well as reusing in creative ways, perhaps, those items that we do have before, you know, we throw them in the bin.
I definitely think that, especially since quarantine, a lot of people have turned to online shopping as a way to cope. And there has been a cope with being inside all day, you know. And I will talk to my friends and they'll be like, oh yeah, every day I get something new from Amazon. Like every day I have a new package. Like I hear so many, at first I thought it was a joke, but so many people have consistently told me that I'm like, oh shoot, people are really just buying this many things online. And I think a very effective rule for myself, because I try, you know, to buy locally, but if I need to get something online to stop myself from like doing that addictive shopping of just purchasing a whole bunch of things, my rule is I buy one thing and I wait until it comes before I buy anything else online, because that gives me more time to think about it and see whether or not I actually need it. Like even when unless it's like food, like usually when I'm out shopping, I'll think like, okay, can I actually see myself using this item? Like if not, then like I probably don't need it. And that's really helped me reduce my waste.
Great. All right. I just wanted to remind attendees that you're welcome to enter any questions you may have into the Q&A function, and we'll be sure to bring those out to the panelists. Anna, I have a question for you. Have you ever had to get rid of bulky items that don't fit in the bins? Such as e-waste or hard to recycle items like mattresses. Did you just leave them on the side of the road, or what did you do?
So e-waste, I take that to campus because that's easy for me. But yeah, I've definitely had a couch go out, and I currently have a futon mattress I still need to deal with that's just kind of sitting in my yard until I find a way to deal with that. So in the past, usually when I have like a big bulky item, I don't have really a way to get rid of it on my street. So what I'll do is I'll take it to my old apartment complex where I used to live, and place it there. And I feel a little bit better about it because I asked my friend who lives there now and get the key and put it in the trash receptacle area at least. And then, their rent is paying for it, for that service to get rid of it. Trying to think. Yeah, it's not like my landlord helps out at all with that. And my landlord has their own junk piles around our street as well, where big old things sit around. It's kind of the vibe on the street, unfortunately.
Well, this is a question for all of you. What do you think? How can we mobilize our landlords and property managers to do a better job, whether it's providing the right bins, the right size bins, better signage and education? Any thoughts there?
I think a piece of legislation would be helpful, and even before legislation, which would actually be more easier and obtainable to do, especially in a small city like Arcata, where we can just go talk to our local officials at city council and they're really receptive to what the citizens of Arcata want. We could pass legislation or a county ordinance or even a city ordinance at a smaller scale to start to get landlords on board with waste reduction. I think that would be a good place to start.
I think if you are on good terms with your landlord, and it's more difficult with like larger landlord corporation like Kramerville's, it's kind of more difficult to get in touch with them there. But if you're on good terms with your landlord and they only have a couple of properties, you can express to them like, hey, if there isn't trash laying around, it's really going to increase your property value, and give them kind of an economic incentive to get on that service, because in many cases, the landlord's job is to be your landlord. They don't necessarily have a lot of other time constraints. So in those situations, that's an option that could work out.
Yeah, I think like you were saying, Morgan, just labeling the bins. Like I've seen some bins around here and some back home in Sacramento that actually have like pictures on them of like what you can recycle and what you can't. And I think like implementing that with like more bins would be a lot more helpful. I think in terms of that, like with the pictures and stuff, that then people can kind of like connect. Because if you said, like Amanda was talking earlier, Tetra Paks, like a lot of people probably wouldn't, put a picture in their head with what that is. But I mean, a lot of it too is kind of like, unfortunately, we have to bear the burden of educating ourselves in that sense, because like some people might not know necessarily like what's recyclable and what's not. So it's kind of up to them to look into that and figure it out. And unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people don't care enough to take that extra step. So it's a bummer, but.
Yeah, and I can, from personal experience, I have a neighbor who's curbside recycling cart has been rejected now for the third week in a row because of all the trash in it. But all that Recology does is, that I think it's good that they reject it, and they put an oopsie tag on it saying, we couldn't take this because of all the trash in it. But they don't leave like a guide that says, these are the only things you should be putting in this bin. So I think some of that, I totally agree with you, Sam. We as individuals can take that responsibility. But I think, our waste haulers like Recology should meet us halfway and do more to educate those that, are using their services. I mean, ultimately, cleaner recycling is going to benefit Recology. So it's definitely in their interest to put a little more energy into that. My personal opinion, but I think we can't put the responsibility entirely on the individual renter. Really, it needs to be all of us, the hauler, as well as landlords and property managers. So
I also think it's important for landlords to take the initiative on this, because especially in a town like Arcata, where it is a lot of students from out of the area, people don't know what is recyclable and what isn't, just because what is recyclable varies per region. So when we come up here, we come up with ideas of what is recyclable, and Humboldt doesn't actually recycle those items. So I think it's really important for the landlords themselves to reach out and clarify these issues.
Right. So here's an idea. Should we organize and go to a city council meeting and raise this issue? The city of Arcata has a zero waste action plan. So I think, at least in words, they've expressed, a desire to curb, some of the waste issues in the city. But I wonder if they need a little nudge, because I definitely see it as a problem. Just, riding my bike around town and, seeing overflowing dumpsters everywhere. It's mind-numbing sometimes.
I bet the city council would appreciate a nudge, because I know working as a bureaucrat, you often get wrapped up in whatever's on your desk in the moment. So if we came to them with some kind of proposal, I'm sure they'd be really receptive. However, I don't know what the state of city council has been in coronavirus times. I don't know if they're still meeting and if the public is still welcome, but definitely food for thought. And I am in contact with Emily Benvey, who's the director of the environmental programs for the city of Arcata, and I'm sure this would be something that she could help us with.
Cool. Yeah, the city council is meeting via Zoom, and they still do have a public comment period. Yeah, let's chat about that. That might be a fun thing to do. All right. And just for our attendees, please feel free to join us in the conversation. There's that Q&A function. We'd love to entertain any questions you might have. So while we're waiting for you to type in your question, let me ask another one of our panel. Sam, curious about your thoughts, given all of your work with Rose, about creative reuse and some ideas you might have for folks living off campus on how to possibly creatively reuse items that are too often dealt with as a waste product.
Yeah, I actually did a workshop earlier this week as a part of Zero Waste Conference called Don't Trash It, Craft It. And that's all about upcycling and then using things beyond their intended use. I'm a big thrift shopper, so and then, you know, getting clothes that like don't fit, or like I want to like do something different to it. So I have like clothing scraps and then like old things lying around, and there's a lot of stuff that you can do with that instead of throwing it away. One of the things that I talked about in that workshop was making like unpaper towels. So that's something that you can do for sure. And then I also talked about like reusable period pads that you can use. You can use those like clothing straps for as well. And then I also just keep it around and like use it as like string or tying like gifts and stuff, like stockpiling a bunch of like jars or like paper bags and those things, and then using that to wrap, you know, presents and stuff during zero waste during Christmas. Yeah, and then I, you know, keeping like glass jars like Amanda. When I shop too, I always try to like, you know, buy stuff that's more in glass and aluminum than plastic, and I like tend to kind of hoard the glass a little bit. But I think that that's, you know, you can use a glass jar for so many different things, and it's often just thrown away because they're like, oh, this was just a peanut butter jar and that's all it is. But there's so many other things that you can, you know, use it for. So it's just kind of like thinking beyond, yeah, like what the intended use of an item is, and just getting creative with it. And then it's just kind of fun. Like it's a way to do crafts and then also reuse things and limit your waste as well.
What are some good resources for people that are, you know, interested in creative reuse? Where do you get your information?
There's a lot of stuff available just online, like Googling stuff. There's a lot of YouTube channels and YouTube videos. Instagram's an awesome place. For what I did specifically in the workshop, I have like slideshows and videos for those as well that will be posted to the website and the Instagram. So that's a place that you can use. And then, yeah, a lot of it is just from my own brain, just like seeing an item and being like, well, I don't want to throw this away. Like, what can I do with it instead? But yeah, I mean, we have access to the internet, and there's tons and tons of videos on YouTube, and just kind of like cross-referencing too, because people do things differently. So just finding like your best match.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Anyone else have some good ideas on creative reuse?
I like to take any kind of plastic jug that comes up in my house and use it for gardening. It's really simple to just cut off the top of a container and then drill holes in the bottom, and it could be a planter of any size. So that's really fun. And then going off of what Sam said about the jars, I am also a glass jar hoarder. It's so ugly, and there's always so much space being taken up, but it does come in handy because I have jars any time of day, anytime anybody needs one, I got you.
Nice. All right. Well, let me ask, this is a question for everybody. So in a perfect world, what would be in place at your rental and in society in general for you to be able to easily practice a zero waste lifestyle? But in a perfect world, what would you want to see?
I don't know if this is necessarily on the lines of like a perfect world, but I think in terms of, like I said, seeing some bins that have like that signage on it with the specific things that can be recycled or not. I'm not sure if those are like newer and that's why some of them have it or not, but I think having all the bins have that on that would be really useful. And then I have some cousins who live in Eugene, and they are allowed to put like certain food scraps into their like green waste bins. And so I think that would be like a really awesome thing to implement here. So, yeah.
Kind of building off of that, actually, in my perfect world, my street, we already have like a community green space area for your green waste. And I think personally that there's room for a community compost space. And, you know, those would mix, you know, they wouldn't have to be kept too separate. It wouldn't be too much on my landlord to keep up with. Unfortunately, my landlord's priority is just building more units on this street. A great place right in front of my house right here. I thought, oh, he's going to put in a community garden. It looks perfect. It has perfect sunlight and everything. And no, he's going to build another unit right there. So in my perfect world, you know, using land for space and joy instead of just more money.
I really like how you said community. And I think that if we stop distancing ourselves from our waste, I think that we, you know, we put our trash in the trash can, we close the lid, we don't want to look at it, you know, and then we take the trash out and then we never think about it again. But I think if we made waste disposal more of like a community process, like this is the place we come together, like and throw away our trash. I know that sounds a little silly, but I think it would really encourage us to reduce, because we'd understand, well, because I definitely think about it a lot more, you know, since becoming a renter, because that's always a problem, is there's never enough trash cans. But it seems that in a lot of cases that doesn't mean that people are reducing their waste. So you see all of this buildup. And so if it was more about like, we're all here together, we're all using this space, rather than us all being individuals using this space, I think that would be more effective in reducing how much trash we make. Especially for composting as well. Like, I really like the idea of just creating more community gardens where we can take our food scraps, or like talking about it more too, like starting that dialogue. Like, I think community and like talking to your neighbors about these issues with waste is like the path to solving the problem. Like, that's, you know, we're all coming together and storming the city council meeting, right? Like, we can't do that as individuals.
That's really well said, Skylar, and really beautifully said in our mind's eye when we think about this perfect, you know, society that we are building and that we are doing as we launch into our careers. So yeah, I just agree with what everyone said here, and it's all about community and just, you know, sharing knowledge with each other about how, you know, illuminating how easy it really is to compost, and especially, you know, in Arcata we have the local worm guy and these amazing resources. And it all, you know, goes to show when we share our knowledges with our friends and our family and our community, that everybody can become a better waste reducer.
Excellent. Excellent words to close us out. I think I'm gonna give everyone these 10 minutes back. And many thanks everyone for joining us, and a big round of virtual applause to our panelists. I encourage our attendees to check out the rest of the Zero Waste Conference. Tomorrow at 4:30, it's the DIY deodorant workshop, and Friday at 3 is the Compost 101 workshop. And you can find more information about these events, as well as resources on how to reduce waste, by going to humboldt.edu/wrap. Also, you can find information on waste reduction on the humboldt.edu/sustainability website. It's somewhat geared towards waste reduction on campus, but I think a lot of that information is applicable just about anywhere in Humboldt County. So check that stuff out. We hope to see you at the next couple Zero Waste Conference events. And thanks for joining us. And with that, I'll say goodbye to everybody.
Thank you, Morgan.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
All right. We'll see ya. That was fun.